Live from Toronto, Canada, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio, AM 740.
And welcome to the Audio Imaginarium. Come on in, weary traveler. Hang your cloak on a peg, grab a stool, and come warm yourself by the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. Carlos Cagina is the technical producer, and Ryan White is the live stream producer, and we are live streaming tonight on my YouTube channel, Strange Planet. But we're also, this is a first for us, we're also live streaming at the same time on my Rumble channel, which is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. A special hello before we get started, and a thank you, a heartfelt thank you to Deep Paul and Tim Sullivan. Deep Paul and Tim Sullivan, two of our Star Chamber patrons. And Tim and Deep Paul, thank you so much for your generous support and loyalty. It means the world to me. It really does. If you'd like to become an official patron or Patreon supporter, sponsor of Strange Planet, just go to patreon.com/Strange Planet. Patreon.com/Strange Planet. Coming up in hour two, for those of you who are fans of cryptid horror, author, cryptid researcher D.A. Roberts will be here. He'll discuss his Apex Predator series of books, which deal with the legend of the werewolf. We'll also talk about Dogmen and Bigfoot, and perhaps the Native American legend of the Wendigo. D.A. Roberts coming up in hour two. This hour, the ancient Roman god Saturn has gone by many names, including Kronos, El, and Lel, and Molech. And the sons of Saturn were worshipped by the warrior cult of Philistine giants of David's day from the Old Testament. In his latest groundbreaking book, from Derek P. Gilbert's The Second Coming of Saturn, Derek reveals how powerful people believe the stars have aligned to bring back the old god Saturn, the occult symbols embedded in the United States Capitol that points to the return of Saturn's reign, and why Lucifer is Saturn, not Satan. Evidence that Saturn was the leader of the rebellious sons of God. And we'll discuss who is Satan, actually. Or rather, who is Saturn, actually. A new age began December 20th, 2020, called the Great Conjunction, a meeting in the sky of the planets Jupiter and Saturn, which heralds the beginning of the Age of Aquarius, a new golden age, perhaps, to be ruled by Saturn. Derek P. Gilbert hosts the news analysis program 5 to 10 for SkyWatchTV and co-hosts the weekly video program Sci-Fi and Unraveling Revelation with his wife, author, and analyst Sharon K. Gilbert. Derek is the author of the groundbreaking books Bad Moon Rising, The Great Inception, and Last Clash of the Titans, among others, and his latest is The Second Coming of Saturn, The Great Conjunction, America's Temple, and the Return of the Watchers. Derek, how are you? Welcome back.
Thank you, Richard. It's always an honor to be here. Enjoying life when the Missouri Ozarks, where things are still free.
Oh, they are. Everything's pretty loose down there?
Life, yes. We are basically able to live our lives without too many restrictions. So we are blessed. We've got friends on both coasts, and I know they're in Toronto. You under a few more restrictions than we are here in the Ozarks.
Well, God bless. This is kind of a Missouri theme show, because my guest in the second hour, writer D.A. Roberts, is also down in the Ozarks. So it's a Missouri program tonight. So
good.
The Roman god Saturn, as you point out, goes by many names: Molech and Enlil and El and Kronos. But how did you determine that all of these different names actually are referring to the same entity, Saturn?
This really grew out of the research that Sharon and I have been doing over the last couple of years for our previous books, Giants, Gods, and Dragons, Veneration, even Last Clash of the Titans. It's no secret that Kronos of the Greeks and Saturn of the Romans are the same entity, and the classical historians, the Romans and Greeks of the first few centuries of the Christian era, knew that the Phoenician god Baal Hermon was just Kronos and Saturn by a different name, and they equated him also with El of the Canaanites. So after getting through our last project, I thought, okay, well, we've got this great conjunction coming up on the winter solstice of 2020, a date that, of course, has significance in the occult realm, where Jupiter and Saturn met in the sky at 0 degrees of the constellation Aquarius. I thought, okay, I've got all of this other research that I've sort of been collecting while researching other stuff connected to the ancient religions of Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean world. So decided to try to piece it together. And when you start following those lines of research, it's pretty clear that even the people of the ancient world, through multilingual god lists, essentially the equivalent of Google Translate from the 3rd century BC or whatever, would equate the god Dagon, for example, of the Amorites, with El of the Canaanites, and with Enlil of the Akkadians and Sumerians. And then likewise, they would equate Enlil with Kumarbi of the ancient Hurrians, and Kumarbi with So when you start piecing it all together, it's clear that this entity, going by different names, occupied the same slot in the pantheons of all of these different cultures. He was the god who took over from the sky god, sometimes by force. In several of the myths, he castrated the sky god in the process, and then was later deposed, overthrown, sometimes violently, and then confined to the netherworld. The pattern repeats, and we trace this back through human history, going back more than 5,000 years.
5,000. Okay, so I mentioned off the top that you discuss how Saturn was worshipped by the Philistine giants. So Goliath and his tribe, let's say, they were a Saturn worshiping cult. What did that entail exactly, the Saturn worshiping cult?
Okay, well, not under the name Saturn, of course, but the Philistines, when David and his men went out to do battle with the Philistines, we see this in 2 Samuel chapter 18, if I remember correctly, possibly 21. Anyway, 2 Samuel, when David and his men go out to confront the giants, there are a couple of them who are named and are described as descendants of the giant, descendants of the giant. And this is where we start getting into Hebrew, and where it gets difficult for me because I don't speak or interpret Hebrew, but using the work of those who've been trying to piece this together, you find that the word descendant in the Hebrew is not ben, which means son of, it's yeladay, which is better translated as one who was born in the house of someone, like a servant, or one who is initiated into a group. And a scholar by the name of Conrad Leroux argued some years ago that these giants who were described as descendants of Rapha, or descendants of the Rapha, which is a singular form of Rephaim, the giants that the Bible connects to the Nephilim of the pre-flood era, were more accurately described not as literal blood descendants of, but a warrior cult who venerated the spirits of what they believed were their mighty kings of long ago, the Rephaim. Now, since in the book, and in our previous book, Veneration, Sharon and I showed how the Rephaim were the demon spirits that proceeded from the bodies of the Nephilim, the giants destroyed in the flood, which giants were created by the rebellion of the sons of God mentioned in Genesis chapter 6. I put this together and suggest that this entity, who was described as the king of the Titans, Saturn of the Romans, Kronos of the Greeks, and like his other iterations like Enlil and El and Dagon and Molech, all had netherworld connections, underworld connections, that this entity was the most likely candidate for the the leader of this rebellion named in the book of First Enoch, Shemihazah, who is described as the chief of the Watchers. And we know that these entities are in the abyss, in Tartarus, in fact, because in 2 Peter 2, verse 4, he mentions the angels who God did not spare when they sinned, but cast them into hell, except the Greek word behind the English word hell there is Tartarus, which is not the same place as Hades. Hades is where the run-of-the-mill human dead were confined. Tartarus was a special place in the underworld to imprison rebellious supernatural entities.
Right. This is like a maximum security prison.
Exactly right. Threats to the divine order of things. That's where you put the rebel angels. So these rebellious angels, or sons of God from Genesis 6, I equate with the Titans of Greek and Roman mythology. Shemihazah, chief of the Watchers, equated with Saturn, Kronos, or Dagon, who would have been the chief god of the Philistines, the creator of the spirits, the demons worshipped by Goliath and his colleagues.
So Saturn is Shemihazah?
Yes. In my view, I think that equation holds up.
All right, but we mentioned the Philistines, but it goes back further, right? You take the worship of Satan back further to the Urkesh in northern Mesopotamia?
Right. Urkesh is a site that was excavated between 1984 and 2011 by a husband and wife team of archaeologists at the UCLA. And their research is really phenomenal because this city was the oldest known city founded by a group of people called the Hurrians. The Hurrians, they're mentioned in the Bible as the Horites. They were developing urban civilization in northern Mesopotamia at the same time the Sumerians were developing their civilization in the south. And the most striking find at this city of Urkesh, which is in northeastern Syria, almost a literal stone's throw from the border with Turkey, was a temple dated to the middle of it's about 3500 BC, dedicated to this chief god Kumarbi. Kumarbi is just another identity worn by Kronos, Saturn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Back about 1940, texts were found in what is now Turkey that described how Kumarbi became the king of the gods and then was overthrown by his son. And when scholars translated those texts from the Hurrian language, they discovered, hey, wait a minute, this sounds exactly like the story of Kronos and the Titans being overthrown by Zeus and the Olympians, except that it's much older. Again, that Hurrian city established about 3500 BC, and because of certain type of pottery that is very unique, the Bucciolatis, the archaeologists from UCLA, were able to trace this culture back to about 1,000 years earlier, to about 4500 BC, in the Ararat Plain, which just happens to be the lowlands below the mountains where Noah's Ark is supposed to have come to rest.
Ah, all right. And what is the connection between Saturn and the word abyss?
Saturn was confined to Tartarus by Jupiter, just as Kronos was confined to Tartarus by Zeus. It's the same story, just different names by different cultures. This worship of the old god Kumarbi, who I argue in the book is probably the oldest historical reference to this entity other than Shemihazah in the book of Enoch. The worship of Kumarbi at Urkesh involved the use of something called the Abi, A-B-I, that was a ritual pit that the Bucciolatis were able to excavate down to a depth of about 22 feet, but they only got about halfway down because of they were concerned about the structural integrity of the pit collapsing on the workers. So it was, but here's the thing, the Hurrian culture was around for thousands of years, couple thousand years. It didn't disappear until about the time of the judges in the Bible. So around 1200 BC, the Hurrian culture finally disappears from history. So for at least 2,000 years, the Hurrians occupied northern Mesopotamia, and they were in contact with the Akkadians and the Amorites and the Hittites who occupied Turkey. And the Hittites preserved their religious texts. So the Bucciolatis were able to connect the ritual practices at ancient Urkesh thanks to these texts preserved by the Hittites for like 2,000 years later. A scholar in the mid-1960s, even before Urkesh was discovered by the Bucciolatis, studied the linguistics of the Hurrians. He became an expert in the Hurrian language and determined that, contrary to the assumption of most historians, that civilization began in what is now southeast Iraq with the Sumerians and spread out from there, that the word Abzu in Sumerian, which is where we get the word abyss, actually was derived from the Hurrian word Abi. And so the abyss, the Abzu, the netherworld, Tartarus, essentially began the whole concept of this netherworld domain where you had to summon the gods from the underworld by going into a pit and sacrificing and then raising them up and then sending them back and then having to seal off the magic circle through which they appeared. That goes back to the ancient Hurrians, and the oldest occurrence of this, again, documented at this city in northern Syria, probably as far back as 3500 BC.
Derek P. Gilbert is with us. His latest is The Second Coming of Saturn, The Great Conjunction, America's Temple, and the Return of the Watchers. So, disciples of Saturn or worshipers of Saturn, what kind of practices did they involve themselves? I mean, was there human sacrifice? Was there child sacrifice?
Well, that is a common thread among the more recent identities worn by this entity: Saturn, Baal Hermon of the Phoenicians, and Kronos of the Greeks. It's established that all of them welcomed child sacrifice, and in the book I explain why I identify Molech with this entity as well. And Molech in the Bible was infamous for requiring that his followers offer their children in fire, burn them alive. But this practice is known and documented at Phoenician sites as late as the classical era. So in the centuries leading up to the Christian era and even into the early Christian era, the Phoenicians were still taking part in this. The most well-known of the rites of Saturn, of course, is Saturnalia, which was every year in Rome between December 17th and the 24th. But Saturn, by the time of the Romans, even though he was still accepting child sacrifice, his reputation had been rehabilitated somewhat from his earlier iterations. And the Temple of Saturn in Rome was, because it was believed by the Romans that after Jupiter had deposed him and cast him down to Tartarus, that he escaped. He fled to Italy, where he set up shop as a farmer and ruled over a golden age where life was wonderful. And so the Temple of Saturn in Rome was where the Roman government kept its treasury, which meant its hoard of gold. But interestingly, when the Temple of Jupiter was being built in Rome, when it was under construction around 526 BC, the last king of Rome, before it became the Roman Republic, decided that the Temple of Saturn would be moved to the bottom of a particular hill, which had been called Mons Saturnus, the Mount of Saturn, and replaced with this new temple of their chief god Jupiter, the storm god. And in the book, I explain how that sequence of events actually led to the United States Capitol being named the Capitol.
We're just heading into a break here in a couple of minutes, but based on my limited knowledge of the Roman worship of Saturn and Saturnalia, I mean, you mentioned that they rehabilitated Saturn's image, because my knowledge, shallow as it is that Saturnalia was a time where slaves would sit down with masters, they would share a drink. It was, there was maybe some gambling going on, but certainly no mention of, human sacrifices. Was it? Go ahead. Why am I wrong here? Or
No, you're correct. It was in fact the most popular of the annual festivals in Rome, and again, this is why Saturn's reputation, his image, had been sort of rehabilitated. He certainly was considered more favorable in Rome than Kronos was considered to the Greeks. But it was a time where the societal norms were overturned. Slaves were served by their masters, and people played practical jokes on one another. But there was an earlier Greek festival that did the same thing called the Chronia. And it's not surprising because, again, this is the same entity under a different name. And in fact, one scholar whose field of expertise is Greek religion traces this back to an older Hittite text to the Hurrian god Kumarbi. And so it appears that what we call the Saturnalia today actually originated with the old Hurrian god Kumarbi hundreds of years, perhaps even more than 1,000 years before the first documented celebration of the Saturnalia in Rome.
All right, we'll take a quick time out, Derek. Stay put. We'll come back, continue to discuss the ancient worship of Saturn, the second coming of Saturn. Derek's latest, the second coming of Saturn, the Great Conjunction, America's Temple, and the return of the Watchers. Back with more in 3 minutes. Don't go away.
Where there's smoke, there's The Conspiracy Show with Richard Sarat from Zoomer Radio.
And we are back. Derek P. Gilbert stays with us from SkyWatchTV, and his latest is the second coming of Saturn, the Great Conjunction, America's Temple, and the return of the Watchers. So, how do we square Saturn with? Well, you sort of have gotten into this a little bit, but square Saturn with Lucifer. In order to do that, don't you have to get Saturn back to the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve?
Yes, but that's the interesting thing about the passage in Isaiah 14, from which we get the word Lucifer, which actually was just a translation into Latin by Jerome. When he translated the Latin Vulgate version of the Bible, he translated the Hebrew Halel ben Shachar, which means light bringer, son of dawn, into using the Latin words lux for light and ferris for carry. And we have anglicized it into Lucifer, assuming that it was a proper name. It's not really a proper name. It's sort of an odd transliteration of the Latin. But when you read Isaiah chapter 14 and the parallel chapter in Ezekiel 28, which scholars agree describes the same event, there's nothing in either of those chapters that mentions the temptation of Adam and Eve as the reason for that particular rebel being cast out of Eden. And I think we've been taught that that it must refer to Satan because that's the only enemy that most Christians have been taught to believe is actually real. When you read the Old Testament more carefully, and this is what Sharon and I have been trying to do the last 5 and 6 years, is take the Bible at face value. When God refers to the gods of Egypt, for example, in Exodus 12:12, and says he's going to execute judgments on them the night of the Passover, who is he talking about if they're just imaginary? In Psalm 82, when he takes his position in the midst of the divine council and says, you are gods, all of you, sons of the Most High, but like men you shall die and fall like any prince. Who is he talking about? Most Bible teachers will say, well, he's talking about the judges of Israel. But that disregards the actual Hebrew meaning of the words sons of God, B'nai Ha-Elohim, that never refers to humans. So we've got to consider the possibility that maybe another rebel is in view. And it would take more time to go into some depth here on Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, but I think the bottom line is this. When you look at Isaiah 14 in the context of the other references there to the Rephaim, the shades in English, who are stirred up to greet this rebel when he is cast down to Sheol, and a reference in Isaiah 14:19 about being cast away from his grave like a loathed branch. We showed in a previous book that word translated branch, assuming that it's based on the Hebrew word netzer, is actually based on an Egyptian loan word that was used to describe the god Osiris, the god of the dead, who's being cast out because you are like a loathed dead god. Satan still was roaming the earth at least through the 1st century. We see in the Old Testament, in the time of Job, that God is in the heavenly courtroom of the Most High. Hey, look at this dude Job here. I think I can tempt him to curse your name. And in Zechariah chapter 4, Satan is accusing the high priest of Israel in the days of Zechariah and Zerubbabel, a high priest named Joshua. So he was not confined to the netherworld, like this entity who is described in Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14. So I suggest that this is the leader of the rebellion that we read about in those first 4 verses of Genesis chapter 6, expanded on in the early chapters of the book of First Enoch, the Watchers, the chief of the Watchers, Shemihazah. And what I think is really intriguing about this is that when you read Ezekiel 28 closely, and you read about how every precious stone was his covering, those are the same stones that were described when God gave the instructions to Moses for building the ephod of the high priest. So this entity, I argue Shemihazah, or Saturn to the later Romans, may have been the high priest in Eden before he decided to come down to earth and destroy what God had created by first contaminating the human bloodline and creating a new hybrid race to take over the earth, and secondly, teaching us forbidden knowledge, things we weren't supposed to know.
So, Shemihazah, or Saturn, and the other fallen angels that gather at Mount Hermon, to begin their rebellion. You say that there is a connection, an interesting connection between Mount Hermon and the Mount of Olives, explain what that connection is, the significance also of the Mount of Olives.
Well, Mount Hermon was where this rebellion took place, and it was also known to the Canaanites around ancient Israel that was the mountain where their creator god El, who is just another identity worn by this old rebel, Shemihazah, Saturn, El, that was his mount of assembly. That's where he held court with his consort Asherah. At the base of the mountain is the Grotto of Pan, which is a cave, used to be the source of the Jordan River, but it was believed in ancient times to be the literal entrance to the netherworld. You would sacrifice an animal, and there are documented memorials to human sacrifice on Mount Hermon. The sacrifice would be thrown into the waters in the grotto, and if the sacrifice sank, it was accepted by the god. On the Mount of Olives, in the time of Solomon, Solomon was the one who constructed the Temple of Yahweh, the Temple of God, on the Mount Moriah, which is the Temple Mount today. Mount of Olives is just across the Kidron Valley, and if you've ever been to Jerusalem, you stand on the Mount of Olives and you look down onto the Temple Mount. When God directed David and Solomon to build the temple, he didn't pick the highest hill in Jerusalem. So Solomon, through one of his wives, probably his Ammonite wife, was cajoled or coerced into building a temple or a high place for the god described in the Bible as the abomination of the Ammonites, Nokam. Nokam is just a Semitic word that means king. A scholar has shown that Nokam is just actually El by a different name. The Hebrews called him Molech. All right? So because Solomon essentially put a temple to Molech on the summit of the Mount of Olives, looking down on the temple of God, they call the Mount of Olives the temple of corruption, the temple of, there's definite article, the is in there, temple of the corruption, but the word also means destroyer. Mount of the destroyer is, I think, a better translation of what the priests following the time of Solomon referred to the Mount of Olives, because you've got this temple to this entity, Shemihazah, El, Molech, Saturn, looking down on the temple of God. But just like the Mount Hermon, which was believed to be the mountain sacred to El, with the Grotto of Pan at the base, the literal entrance to the netherworld, the Mount of Olives, with this temple on top, when you go down into the Kidron Valley below and follow that around to the south, it connects to the Valley of Hinnom. The Valley of Hinnom is where the Tophet was constructed. The Tophet was the place where people would go and burn their children as an offering to Molech. So I think that was the connection where you had, and because of that, the Valley of Hinnom later was called Gehenna by the Hebrews in the time of Jesus and the apostles, and served as a symbol for the netherworld, a place of eternal torment and punishment. But I think significantly, Jesus recognized the significance of the Mount of Olives and this connection to this entity, this old rebel, because the last week of Jesus' life was split between the Temple Mount, teaching in the temple in Jerusalem, and then on the Mount of Olives. He was betrayed at the Garden of Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives. He was crucified on the Mount of Olives. He was put into a tomb on the Mount of Olives. According to 1 Peter 3, he descended into the abyss and proclaimed victory over these entities that Peter and Jude both say wrote are in chains in gloomy darkness until the judgment. He ascended again, was resurrected on the Mount of Olives, and according to the Gospel of Luke, when he was transported up into heaven, he left this earth from the Mount of Olives, and according to Zechariah chapter 14, when he returns, it will be on the Mount of Olives. So I think there's some significance there. There's plenty of clues in the Bible that this location is very, very important. But likewise, the Mount of Transfiguration, where Jesus climbed a very high mountain with his three most prominent disciples, Peter, James, and John, was at Caesarea Philippi, which is where the Grotto of Pan is located. The gates of hell that he referred to will not prevail against his church. Oh, and they're right over here, this big cave. And then he and his three disciples climbed Mount Hermon, and he was transformed into a being of light. It was essentially sending a flare into the spirit realm, declaring his divinity and challenging these fallen angels and demons to do something about it.
Well, when Jesus says, "I will build my church upon this rock," and many people assumed that was he was referring to Peter. But was he in fact referring to the entrance to that netherworld? In other words, I will build my church on top of, these false gods. Is that what he was referring to as the rock?
He was standing in front of a 9,200-foot mountain. It is the tallest mountain in the Levant, and it was known as the Mount of Assembly for El, the creator god of the Canaanites, where he and his 70 sons, representing the gods of all of the nations, would meet to decree and determine the fates of the world. Jesus climbed that mountain and basically was transformed. Ezekiel and Elijah were there, and I think that was sending a message to the spirit realm, because when you read the gospel accounts, that it was from there, after they came down the mountain, Jesus sent his 72 or 70, depending on your translation, disciples ahead of him into Galilee. That's a significant number. In the ancient Near East, that represented the complete set, or all of them. In other words, what Jesus was saying is like, look, I know I just came off the mountain where El and his 70 sons, representing all of the gods of the nations, held court, but my 70 will someday replace your 70. And then from there, Jesus went to Jerusalem to fulfill his mission, and again, split the last week of his life between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Again, places significant to this rebel, El, Shemihazah, Saturn, who I believe is still looking forward to that day when he gets out, because he will get out of the abyss. The Bible tells us this, but thinks that when that happens, somehow he is going to assume what he believes is his rightful place as the king of creation in the heavens.
All right. And I guess the countdown to the second coming of Saturn has begun. It happened on the winter solstice, December 21, 2020, marking the official beginning of the age of Aquarius. And there are some powerful people who believe that this is the beginning of a new golden age. Not so. Derek Gilbert will explain when we come back. Stay with us.
Loose Lips, Big Brother is listening, and so are you, to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. To speak with Richard, call 416-360-0740 or toll free 1-866-740-4740.
And we are back with Derek P. Gilbert from SkyWatchTV, the second coming of Saturn, the Great Conjunction, America's Temple, and the Return of the Watchers. So, as you indicate in the book, this Great Conjunction that happened in the winter solstice of 2020, this alignment of Saturn and Jupiter, does that then begin this countdown clock to the Saturn escaping from Tarsus and the beginning of this, well, what certain people believe is the beginning of a new golden age ruled over by Saturn?
Well, the abyss isn't going to open up until God gives us permission for that. So I don't want to stoke any fear, but I do believe that there are people looking to the poem by the Roman poet Virgil, who wrote his fourth eclogue around 40 BC, just after the assassination of Julius Caesar. They look at this as prophecy. And this was written probably as a political, how can I say this? He was trying to curry favor with powerful people in Rome. When you're a poet back in the day, you needed sponsors. And so there was a prominent politician by the name of Gaius Asinius Pollio, who was about to become the highest ranking elected official in Rome at that time. But there was a belief among the Romans, which they inherited from the Greeks, that there had been 4 ages of mankind. And this began with the Golden Age, when Saturn or Kronos ruled in the pre-flood era, where heroes commingled with men and heroes commingled with gods, that is. That was followed by a Bronze Age or Silver Age, where things weren't quite as good, and then a Bronze Age, which was violent and bloody and awful, and then the Iron Age was the age in which we currently live. And that this Pollio, who he was trying to suck up to, would bring in this new Golden Age. And I'll read just the relevant bit of Virgil's poem here. Now the last age by Cumae's Sibyl sung has come and gone, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. Justice returns old Saturn's reign with a new breed of men sent down from heaven. And again, this is supposed to kick off a new Golden Age. Well, not coincidentally, this also tracks with the 4 metals that were in the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream of Babylon, who dreamt of a statue with a head of gold and a chest of silver and a torso of bronze and legs of iron, and then toes iron mixed with clay. And there's a prophetic interpretation that the prophet Daniel gives him there. But interesting that the pagans used the same metals and in the same order to describe the ages of humanity. But when Saturn and Jupiter met in the night sky last winter solstice at 0 degrees of Aquarius, according to New Agers, astrologers, and some occultists, this signaled the full entry into the age of Aquarius, and the constellation Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. Astrologers call this the Great Mutation, and this Great Mutation signals a transformation to a new era where power is decentralized and we are much less materialistic.
You will own nothing and you will be happy. Where have we heard that before?
Exactly. And it was 1 month to the day after that conjunction, Richard, that the World Economic Forum announced its official plans for the Great Reset. I think that's what we're looking at here. And I think that's why we're seeing the constant stoking of fear connected to the ongoing COVID pandemic. And when that begins to wane, when people finally get sick of it, say, look, we can read and we understand that this is not the threat that we thought it was when it first broke out, then we'll be back to being hammered with climate change. Because exactly. The goal is to get us to give up control to a central government. They call it decentralized, but it's not.
How do you connect Saturn to the United States Capitol?
Well, just as in Rome, where the temple of Saturn was pushed off of Mons Saturnus and replaced by the temple of Jupiter, symbolizing his Saturn being deposed by Jupiter and replaced as the king of the pantheon. In 1799, when the United States was laying out its official capital city, and that's capital with an A-L on the end, the architect, Pierre Charles L'Enfant, wanted to call the building where Congress met Congress House. Not a very creative name, but that's what L'Enfant wanted to call it. Because it turns out, and I always thought we called the United States Capitol the Capitol because that's what you call the place where your government meets. It's the Capitol. That's just
right.
What you call it. But in 1799, that wasn't true. There was only one building on Earth where a legislative body met in a capitol, and that was Williamsburg, Virginia, Thomas Jefferson's home state. Jefferson insisted that it be called the Capitol because that's the name of the temple of Jupiter in ancient Rome, the Capitolium. So named because when they were digging the foundation for the Capitol, they found a severed head, which apparently to the king of Rome, the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, he was an Etruscan, and apparently for Etruscans, you used a severed head when you wanted to communicate with the dead. That was how they conducted their augury. So that was taken as a good sign. And so they decided to rename the hill from the Mount of Saturn, Mons Saturnus, to the Capitolium. And they named the Temple of Jupiter the Capitolium, the Capitoline Hill on which the Capitolium was built. And that's why Jefferson wanted the United States Capitol named the Capitol, not because he wanted to worship Jupiter, but because he wanted, I think, to evoke the image of Republican Rome. What's interesting, though, is that Jupiter being equated to Zeus, both storm gods, both kings of their respective pantheons, they were also equated to Baal in the Canaanite pantheon, likewise storm god, king of the pantheon. Two different places in the New Testament. In Matthew 12, Jesus equates Baal with Satan, and in Revelation 2, where Jesus is dictating his letter to the church at Pergamum, he equates Zeus with Satan. So in effect, what Jefferson did, probably unintentionally, was named the United States legislative headquarters for the Temple of Satan in ancient Rome.
Wow. All right, Derek, we've got to take one final time out. We'll come back and pick up on that. Stay with us. More of the Conspiracy Show away.
PIN numbers, passcodes, social insurance numbers. If they make you wonder how private they are, here's two more numbers. 416-360-0740 or toll free at 1-866-740-4740.
Welcome back. Derek P. Gilbert stays with us, the second coming of Saturn. And in addition to opening up the phone lines, we'll also take questions from the YouTube live chat and the Rumble live chat. So my live stream producer, Ryan, if you would curate those for me and just send me those questions over Skype, and we'll get to those as well. So we were talking about the Capitol building in Washington, its connection to Saturn and Jupiter. So I'm a little confused because Zeus, as you point out, the throne of Zeus is also equated as Satan's throne. So how could Zeus and Saturn both be Satan?
I argue in the book, and I'll try to be brief so we can allow more time for questions, but that the art inside the Capitol, the depiction of George Washington inside the Capitol dome as in the painting called The Apotheosis of Washington, he actually represents Saturn ascending from the netherworld to take what he thinks is his rightful place among the gods and rule over the Golden Age, which are depicted by the scenes of commerce and agriculture and industry represented around the outside of the painting called The Apotheosis of Washington. It's not well known, but when Washington died, they had the architects had gotten permission from Martha Washington to put Washington's body on permanent display in a chamber in the crypt, which is the main floor of the Capitol. And there was to have been a hole in the rotunda floor. There was for a while, through which viewers in the rotunda, visitors to the rotunda, could look down and see Washington. You'd have the portal there in the floor through which Washington's spirit would ascend through the oculus, the eye, to become the god. And again, I go into the symbolism in the painting. It turns out Washington was never brought to the Capitol. The whole plan was interrupted by the War of 1812, and then Martha passed away, and Washington's descendants said, no, we're going to keep him here in Mount Vernon. But even the way he's depicted on the ceiling there with the purple cloth representing kingship, but the fact that his legs are wrapped in the cloth is similar to the way the statue of the idol of Saturn had his legs wrapped in wool in the temple of Saturn in Rome, except during the Saturnalia. So I think the imagery is suggestive of Saturn rising from the netherworld, from the crypt through the oculus to his position in the sky, depicted in the Apotheosis of Washington.
The fact that Washington wasn't buried there, did that forestall the second coming of Saturn in some way?
No. This will all happen when God allows it to happen. As the ones who are confined to the abyss, we see in Revelation chapter 9, there are things that get out of the abyss. An angel is given a key to the bottomless pit, and these things come out, and they've got 5 months to torment humans without the seal of God on their foreheads. This mirrors the 150 days that the Ark of Noah was on the waters. That's mentioned in Genesis 7 and Genesis 8. 150 days in a 30-day lunar calendar, that's exactly 5 months. These entities who had created these hybrid children were forced to watch from their confinement in Tartarus, the abyss, for 5 months while their children were being destroyed in the flood above. At the end, during the Great Tribulation period, they will have 5 months to get revenge on those who've not been sealed by God.
You also link the the events of the Capitol on January 6, 2020, to the return of Saturn.
I have to give credit to my wife, Sharon, on this one. She spotted the symbolism. January 6th is a day that is commemorated in the Christian church as Epiphany. It's called Theophany in the Eastern Orthodox churches. It's the day that celebrates the revelation of the divinity of Christ. So here we've got this event that took place in what many of our prominent politicians called our temple of democracy, or the most sacred space in our republic. People like Chuck Schumer and Amy Klobuchar, Nancy Pelosi, Dick Durbin, Representative Liz Cheney, and many, many political pundits. This sacred space has been desecrated just this past week. President Biden referred to the Capitol as America's temple of democracy as he eulogized former Senator Bob Dole. So you got this idea that's been implanted in our heads that somehow the United States Capitol is sacred space. And then on Theophany or Epiphany, the day we acknowledge and recognize, celebrate the recognition of the divinity of Christ by the three wise men, the QAnon shaman wearing the buffalo hat leads a rebellion and a desecration. And in the book and in my previous book, Last Clash of the Titans, I go into some detail on the significance of bison or buffalo imagery among the old gods of Mesopotamia. You looked at an inscription from ancient Sumer, you could tell who the gods were by looking for the guys wearing the hats with the buffalo horns on it.
Remarkable.
Even the name Kronos, the king of the Titans, comes from a Semitic word meaning horns. Kronos is essentially the horned one. That's who we're dealing with here. I think this was a nudge, nudge, wink, wink symbol or signal from the fallen realm that, hey, we're coming back.
The celebration of Christmas during what is the ancient celebration of Saturnalia, is it unwise or unchristian then to celebrate Christmas during Saturnalia?
Well, no, because Saturnalia ends on the 24th, and the way the early church arrived at December 25th was actually pretty simple. It's not biblical. I mean, as a Christian, I recognize that there's nothing in the Bible that says we need to celebrate Christmas. But it is the one time a year we can mention the name of Christ, Jesus Christ, in public without being, shamed for it. The early church, as early as the 3rd century, trying to figure out when the birth of Jesus had taken place, there was an old tradition among the Jews that famous prophets would die on the same day that they were conceived. And so they tried to calculate the date of the crucifixion. They got it wrong because they came up with the date March 25th of the year 29 AD, but that was that simple. You take March 25th, you add 9 months, and you get December 25th. So that's all there was to it. No Christian until about the 12th century thought there was anything pagan about the celebration of Christmas.
All right. That's good to know. A couple of quick questions here. Not Gordian asks, do the Hurrians still exist today, maybe as a diaspora?
There are some who suggest they might, their descendants might be the Armenians or perhaps the Kurds, but it's impossible to know. That new research into tracing DNA may answer that question someday.
Renee Image asks, I think you sort of answered this, but she saw a documentary called Belly of the Beast, which shows how the Capitol has a secret chamber. Is this true? Well, you mentioned the secret chamber beneath the rotunda, correct?
Yes. In fact, I know the filmmakers, Justin and Wes Fall, they're friends of mine. And Tom Horn, of course, was...
yes, they've been on the program. They're terrific. They're terrific.
Yes. And a lot of what is in the book here is built on Tom's research for that documentary and for his books, Zeitgeist 2025, Apollyon Rising 2012. So, yeah, I take it from there. The only twist in my view is that it's Saturn who's coming back, not Apollyon. Well, it is Apollyon because I believe that Saturn is Apollyon and Abaddon, just not the Antichrist. So I make a distinction between Apollyon and the Antichrist.
Core Gemini asks, do you believe the Hindu gods are the same as these ancient gods, perhaps just under a different name?
Yes, I haven't done enough study on the Hindu gods to make those connections yet, but there are some similarities. The king of their gods, Indra, is likewise a storm god.
All right. How do we get a copy of The Second Coming of Saturn, Derek?
It's available through Amazon or at any major bookstore, and can also be obtained through the SkyWatchTV store, which is at skywatchtvstore.com. It is available now in paperback, and the Kindle version will be released at Amazon on January 1st.
Fantastic. The Second Coming of Saturn, the Great Conjunction, America's Temple, and the Return of the Watchers. Any clues in the Bible as to, aside from this Great Conjunction, any other signs as to when the Second Coming of Saturn will happen?
Well, we've been trying to figure that out because we know that they only get 5 months at the end, but there's nothing explicit in Revelation 9 that says what happens to them when that 5 months is over or when that 5 month period ends. But the good news is we've got a long way to go before we get to Revelation 9 and the abyss opening up. But I think we're closer to that period now than we were even, say, 10 years ago. So no dates, though. No date setting.
All right. Derek, always a delight. Thank you so much for hanging out the last hour, and I hope we can do it again. Well, we will do it again, actually, later this month, you and I, on Coast to Coast AM.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Richard.
Likewise, Derek P. Gilbert, The Second Coming of Saturn. All right, when we come back, we'll talk Dogmen, Bigfoot, Wendigo, werewolves. Stay with us.
Live from Toronto, Canada, Earth, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio.
Hey, thanks for inviting me into your home, your long-haul truck, RV, camper, taxi, your parents' well-appointed basement with the simulated wood paneling, electric fireplace, and the painting of dogs playing poker, your loft, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. And hello to everyone tuning us in on our flagship station, Zoomer Radio, AM 740 and 96.7 FM here in Toronto. And hiya to those of you listening on one of our affiliate stations across North America. Hey you, streaming us live at zoomerradio.ca and on the free Zoomer Radio app. And those of you catching the live stream on the YouTube and Rumble channel, Strange Planet is the YouTube channel. And Richard Syrett's Strange Planet is where you'll find us on Rumble. And of course, last but not least, hello to each and every one gathered in the YouTube live chat and the Rumble live chat. All right. They exist in myth and legend, dating back to the earliest history of man. Different cultures of different names for the same creature, which has haunted the dark places of our collective psyche. Loup-garou, werewolf, lycanthropes, Rougarou, Michigan Dogman, the beast of land between the lakes, Ulanga Doglala, Skinwalker, I couldn't pronounce the last one. The beast is known by many names, but they all lead to the ultimate apex predator. And the apex predator is the name of a series of 4 books, which include the titles Wolf Moon, Blood Moon, Hunter's Moon, and the 4th, Horned Moon, all written by my next guest. D.A. Roberts is a cryptozoologist and author of fiction primarily in the horror, dystopian, and science fiction genres. He was born in Lebanon, Missouri. He now lives in Springfield, Missouri with his wife and sons, and for most of his career, D.A. served his community in law enforcement. D.A. also hosts a popular podcast called D.A. Ex Machina, along with co-host Steve Wildman, Monrodis, and Neoma Finn, best known for her work on the Dixie Cryptids and What If It's True podcasts. D.A. Roberts, welcome. Climb on board. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
I was just mentioning to my previous guest, Derek Gilbert, it's all Missouri all the time. He's in the Ozarks as well.
I'm an Ozarks boy, born and bred. I grew up here. It's with any luck, this is where I'll be when I'm an old man.
All right. Well, I got to ask you to sort of begin your journey into this whole field of cryptids and cryptid horror writing on the lap of your Uncle Buddy. Tell me about your Uncle Buddy.
My Uncle Buddy was an amazing man. He married into the family. He was full-blood Cherokee Indian, but he married my mother's sister. And he was like a second father to me. I just adored him. He passed away in December of 2019. And it was a very, very deep loss to lose him. I thought and still think the world of my Uncle Buddy. But being Cherokee, I grew up listening to him tell stories about Native legends and tales of different creatures that existed in the mythos, and then later I realized that some of these creatures were very much cryptids, and there are sightings all over the world and all over the United States of these creatures. But I spent my formative years going camping and hunting on his land, and I grew up listening to those stories, and those really helped shape my imagination for where I wanted to be. That was part of what made me want to be a writer in the first place. Between him and my mother really encouraged me to not only be an avid reader, but to pursue writing as well. And it's those early tales that really inspired me.
So you tell the story of how you had this interest in Bigfoot and Dogmen, and you watched, like many of us of our generation, Leonard Nimoy's In Search of, and
oh yeah,
and there were Bigfoot movies, and of course the Patterson film that came out in '67. And you would go around to your relatives, as a young man or a young boy, really asking, "What do you think? Or is Bigfoot real? Have you ever seen one?" And they thought you were being just silly. And then one day, your Uncle Buddy pulled you aside and whispered, "What?"
He picked me up after I'd been asking everybody, about Bigfoot, and they were all laughing at me because I was a fairly young kid. But that glint, that changing, defining moment was when Uncle Buddy set me in his lap when nobody else was around and goes, "They're real because I've seen them." And
wow.
From then on, I was just hooked. I couldn't stop thinking about them.
How'd you sleep that night, by the way?
Well, my imagination is always been something my siblings and my parents just marveled at, because I was always creating these little goofy stories as a kid. And after my mother passed away, I found that she'd kept a lot of them in a drawer, and they were horrible. I mean, they were written by 6-7-year-old. They were really terrible. But her encouragement really is what inspired me to want to continue the writing career. And it's something I love to do. I love being able to share stories with people. And I've been so fascinated and involved in asking people about cryptids and going out camping and looking for evidence, searching all these years, looking for my own experiences and talking to people who have had their own, that I have used these experiences that I've gathered both from my own personal experience and people to shape the behaviors of the creatures that I write about in my fiction.
But to have confirmation from an adult, someone that you admired, that they are real. I mean, that must have, it's one thing to be interested in them and to read about them and to fantasize about them, but to have an adult say they're real. Did that scare you?
It was a paradigm shift. I really was already firmly convinced they were out there. But for, like you said, for someone, an adult, to just admit, yes, they're real and I've seen them. And Uncle Buddy was not the kind of guy to spin yarns. If he told me something, I believed it. He was just that type of person. He didn't even want alcohol on his property. He was not a drinker. He smoked a pipe, but that was like his only vice. He was just a hell of a man. And for him to tell me something like that, I had no doubt whatsoever he was telling me the truth.
And he saw them on his property, did he?
Yes, he did. He lived, there's a little town outside of where I grew up, and Lebanon is not a big town. It's only 12 to 15,000 now, and it was probably 8,000 when I was a kid. And I grew up on a farm north of Lebanon, and Uncle Buddy had 168 acres on land near the Niagara River Valley. Then the closest town was a little bitty town called Eldridge, Missouri, and Eldridge is really nothing more than a couple of houses and a gas station. That's it. It's just a tiny little hamlet in the middle of nowhere, and he was probably 15 miles from it.
Wow. And so what did he see on his land?
He said he had a basement with a walkout basement, and he had his pool table down there. And he told me he was walking down the stairs one night and flipped on the light to go down to play pool. And he stopped about halfway down the stairs when he saw a Bigfoot creature standing in the sliding glass door. It was shut, but it was just standing there looking at him. And he said it filled the entire sliding glass door. I said, well, what'd you do? He goes, well, I reached for a rifle, and I turned and looked, and it was already moving away. He said, so he went out the door, and he lived on a bluff that went down to the Niagara River Valley, and it was descending the bluff that there's no way any human could have went down it. It was probably a 75 degree angle straight down almost, and it was just grabbing rocks and trees and everything he could get his hands on, and went straight down that bluff and down into the river valley.
My word.
I said, did you shoot at it? And he said, no, I did not.
And your Uncle Buddy, obviously, a huge inspiration. He's immortalized now. He passed away in 2019, but he's now immortalized as a character in the Apex Predator series of books, right?
Correct.
Who is he in the books? Who is he?
I based a character named Jay Matoska off of him, and Matoska means white bear, and that character is just very much Uncle Buddy. I mean, anybody that knows him knows that character is based on him. My siblings spotted it immediately.
And tell me about the other protagonist, Gray Eagle.
William Gray Eagle is he's half Lakota, half Cherokee, and he joined the military. After a career in the military, he became a cop, and when this creature starts killing people in the little department that he works for, he realizes that it's not a normal creature, especially when he starts trying to track it. And the first part of the first book, Wolf Moon, is him reconciling what he's been trained in versus what his spiritual beliefs are, and he basically has to come to grips that those two not only intersect, but he has to use the training from one and the beliefs from his spiritual side to help stop this creature. It takes all of his abilities to do it.
So what is the legend of the werewolf in Native American culture? I mean, most of us are familiar, I guess, with more of the European tradition of werewolves and the werewolf movies with Lon Chaney Jr. and you know, the full moon and the silver bullet and sulfur and all of that stuff. But is it the same type of legend that comes when we're talking about werewolves?
Well, the Cherokee term is Ulonga Doglala. It means basically long dogs, and they are bipedal wolves, but they don't shift forms. That is their form. The werewolf mythology kind of blended with it when the European settlers came here and their stories began to meld. But the original version were a type of creature that we now refer to as the Dogman, that has been seen all over the United States and all over the world.
And the legend of the Dogmen then, or these encounters with Dogmen, do they typically end in a grisly death? Are these dogmen, are they in fact apex predators according to Native American myth?
Oh, very much so. The Dogman origins, if you look into cryptid research, most people that report a Bigfoot encounter, generally they either just see it or they feel a presence and they feel it pacing them or hear it pacing them, and it's basically they have an encounter and they leave. Very rarely do you hear an aggressive Bigfoot encounter, but Dogman encounters are very, very different. Dogman encounters tend to be all described as When people see them, they describe it as hellish or demonic. There are accounts from land between the lakes in Kentucky, on the Kentucky-Tennessee border, of people being attacked. There was a famous case that happened allegedly in 1982 when a family of 4 was killed by a dogman in the land between the lakes public recreation area. Sightings of a bipedal wolf in that area date back to the 1600s, when French trappers were going through there and referred to it as the loup-garou, or the French word for werewolf. Native American lore dates back farther than that. Much like the sightings of Bigfoot go back centuries among Native Americans, different tribes have different names for these creatures, and even tribes that had no contact whatsoever from opposite coasts are describing similar creatures, and they have their own names for them.
Describe their, aside from being a bipedal wolf, describe their physicality, if you could.
They are usually described as having very spindly-looking hands, almost like a raccoon. They're human-like hands, but if you've ever seen a raccoon's hands, they look almost like they have an extra digit. They don't, but they're really kind of oddly shaped. But they also end in claws. Their hands don't look normal, but they do have human-like hands. Some are described as having plantigrade feet, while others are described as digitigrade. Meaning,
can you explain the difference there?
Plantigrade feet are like ours, walking on a flat foot, like a human or a primate. Digitigrade are like a dog's back leg. They have that kind of hawk to it.
Yes.
So a lot of there are different sightings that describe different types of stance, and I don't know if it means it's a different type of creature or just a misidentification by the eyewitnesses. But there are hundreds and hundreds of dogman sightings all over the country, and they're actually becoming more common.
And what about the upper torso? Are they more muscular than a typical wolf?
A lot of them are described as being lean but muscular, not broad like a Bigfoot. A Bigfoot would be thick of the chest and arms. These are built more like a canid. Their chest and shoulders are more canid-like, but they do have a wider range of motion because of the arms. And the commonality in the descriptions is people really refer to them as hellish or demonic, and they describe the eyes as glowing, almost of their own, like a glowing a dark orange or a yellow or a gold. One of my favorite accounts I read about happened outside of the land between the lakes area, as a man was in bed one night, and he had a dog door in his kitchen for his dog to go in and out. Well, his dog woke him up whining in his bedroom, which was uncommon, and it was growling toward the stairs. So he got up and grabbed a shotgun and went downstairs, and there was a dog man halfway through his dog door trying to get into his kitchen.
Oh my.
And before he could get a shot off, it ducked back out and took off. But had his dog not alerted him, it might have gotten in the house.
What about the fangs, the incisors? Are they larger than a typical canine?
They are larger, but it's because of the size scale is much bigger. They would be very much like a typical canine tooth, only the fact that it's approximately 7 to 8 feet tall. I mean, just the sheer size difference is going to make the canines bigger.
When we talk about Bigfoot, we have plaster casts, we have fuzzy photographs. What about with dogmen? Do we have plaster casts? Do we have hair samples? Do we have good quality photographs?
A lot of the photographs are fairly blurry, much like the Bigfoot photos. And I credit that to the fact that if you happen upon something in the woods that is a total paradigm shift, be it Bigfoot or a dogman, and it frightens you, your first response is not going to be to stabilize a picture. If you think of taking one at all, it's going to be a quick snap while you're running away. So a lot of photographic evidence is difficult to obtain for those very reasons, because people are very nervous, very gun shy, scared. But Jody Cook of the North American Dogman Project has numerous plaster casts of feet and hair samples.
And the size of the print, again, larger than your average dog, right?
Larger than would be typical for a wolf, with an elongated lower heel.
Interesting. And your Uncle Buddy had a Bigfoot encounter. What did he tell you about dogmen?
He described them as creatures of legend, that he had never seen one, but the elders that he knew had all spoken of them as being very real creatures, and that they were to be avoided at all costs because they were predators.
So he was a Cherokee.
Correct.
And there have been, you mentioned dogmen sightings all over. We have the Beast of Bray Road, which is Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the Land Between Lakes, which is Kentucky. I mean,
are the Michigan Dogman as well?
Michigan Dogman, right?
There have been recent sightings up in New England. A family was stalked and chased into their homes, basically held captive in their home because they couldn't. Every time they tried to get out to go to a vehicle, the creatures would charge them, and they had basically a night of terror as these creatures kept trying to get up to the house and get in. There's another incident that happened in Taylor, Mississippi, which was referred to the siege of Lockett Ranch, where a family named Lockett had a year-long standoff with a clan of dogmen, and they eventually fled their land over it.
Wow, I had no idea. Now, in Europe, there are dogmen sightings, and often they're associated with sacred sites, Stonehenge or Avery or different places like that. What about is there a connection between dogmen and, I don't know, native burial mounds or anything like that?
I think there's a lot of connection between both Bigfoot and dogmen and burial sites. I'm not sure what the connection actually is, but there are a lot of sightings where these cryptids have been seen either in or around graveyards. In fact, there's a small graveyard inside Land Between the Lakes. It's called the Nickel Cemetery, and there's been a number of sightings in and at that cemetery.
Is it possible they're looking for freshly dead corpses?
It's possible. They might be drawn to the smell of carrion, or they might be hoping to catch somebody unawares that's not paying attention, planting flowers or something.
I mean, are they hunting humans for meat or just for the thrill of the kill?
I think they're top of the line predators. If you look at the David Paulides missing 411 cases, there are thousands of people that have gone missing in the national parks, and I think while some of them can be attributed to people getting off the trail and just never being found, fall into a crevasse. There are some that just simply can't be explained. When they call in search and rescue, trained dogs will refuse to follow the scent. They might find a piece of bone of the person years later in an area that was searched many, many times. I think that there's a case to be had for there being large unknown predators in our national park system. And the reason I believe that is, if you're familiar with the book The Wilderness Hunter, written by Teddy Roosevelt.
Yes.
Teddy Roosevelt talks about the Bauman incident where a Bigfoot type creature killed a trapper and the other one fled. There's a growing number of researchers that think that Bauman was actually Teddy Roosevelt, and he used an assumed name because he had political aspirations when he wrote the book. He didn't want people to think he was crazy. So Bauman had a direct contact with a deadly cryptid that killed his partner. And if that was, in fact, Teddy Roosevelt, it would explain the fact that as soon as he became president, one of the first things he did was create the national park system, which isolates millions of acres of land in hard-to-reach areas.
Brilliant, brilliant. All right, D.A., we'll take a quick time out. This is good, folks. D.A. Roberts. And we're talking cryptids. We're talking cryptid horror novels. Apex Predator is a series of 4 books. We'll delve further into some Native American legends of cryptids as well. Stay with us. Don't go away.
If you're sure you're the new world order, this is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Sarrett from Zoomer Radio. To speak with Richard, call 416-360-0740 or toll free 1-866-740-4740.
I'll tell you what, I have a whole new, well, appreciation isn't the right word, respect for dogmen. I had no idea that they were this closely aligned with the legend of the werewolf. I thought that people had sightings of dogmen. Maybe they had kind of an unsettled feeling. I had no idea that dogmen were apex predators, that they were tearing human beings limb from limb, perhaps devouring their flesh. D.A. Roberts is with us, and his series of 4 books, The Apex Predator. Again, the titles are Wolf Moon, Blood Moon, Hunter's Moon, and this is the 4th and final installment, Horned Moon. What's a horned moon?
The horned moon is when the moon is waning and most of it is blocked out, except for the little sliver at the bottom that looks like a set of horns.
So waxing and waning. I got it.
Correct.
So
there will be more books in the series. The next one's going to be called Dark Moon.
Okay. Is there a connection, according to Native American legends and the dogmen? Is there a connection between lunar cycles and appearances of the dogmen?
Yes and no. The first moon of the new year, generally during the coldest time of the year in January, is known as the wolf moon, when the beasts are ravening at the edge of the camp, when the creatures that are still active are looking for food because a lot of it's gone dormant or left for warmer pastures. So I think the Native Americans very much believed that these creatures came more in the harsh winters than they did in the times of plenty, because a predator like this would eat what it could catch, and I would say something that size could easily catch a deer or an elk.
And do the Native Americans believe that and you as well, that dogmen are flesh and bone, or are they in part a spiritual entity?
Well, there's schools of thought on both of that. There's a condition known as Sinocephaly, which talks about it dates back centuries. It's a condition whereupon they have a human type body, but the head of a dog, much like Anubis. In fact, I believe it's Saint Michael is known as the dog-headed saint, and a lot of the Catholic depictions show him as having the head of a dog. No, I'm sorry, it's St. Christopher, not St. Michael. But Sinocephaly has been reported for centuries. They spoke of men with the heads of wolves and the lion men of Judah in the Bible. Marco Polo and Christopher Columbus both spoke of dog-headed creatures on islands they visited during their journeys. So creatures with the head of a dog that appear almost human have been something that people have been talking about, that not just in recent years, but dating back to antiquity. So it's not just Native American lore; it's been prevalent everywhere. When you talk about the god Anubis, the Egyptians firmly believed that there were people with the head of animals. The condition is not unheard of. It's pretty terrifying, but it's not unheard of.
So, are the dogmen? Are there any sort of supernatural aspect to them?
I would think so. Yes, I think that there is something more supernatural about them, but I think they're also very much flesh and blood. It's a type of creature that is so steeped in lore and myth that we don't know 100% what it is. There's so many people that, like, especially with Bigfoot, they lean toward a supernatural aspect, or they think that there might be an alien connection with Bigfoot. And a lot of Native American tribes believe that Bigfoot is a trans-dimensional creature, that it can come in and out of our dimension whenever it chooses to. And a lot of that also travels over to the Dogman. So it's very possible that it's a supernatural creature. But my background in law enforcement, I tend to lean toward what I can tangibly find as evidence. So me personally, I think it's a flesh and blood creature. It's just very strong.
Are they seen in the daytime?
There have been a lot of accounts of it in the daytime. There were dogmen that have been reported by the U.S. Border Patrol near the U.S.-Mexico border in Arizona and New Mexico.
Really?
Very much so, yes, sir.
My word. And are they fleet of foot?
Very quick, much like a wolf. You're not going to outrun one.
Even though it's walking upright.
There are a lot of accounts, and this is something I find very interesting about the Dogmen. There are a lot of accounts of people that report seeing the Dogman on all fours prior to it approaching them. And just before it stood up, they would hear a popping sound, much like you crack your knuckles, and then it would stand up and have hands. To me, that speaks of a type of morphology to the hands that would allow them to transition from going on all fours and still be able to use the hands later, almost like they're drawing their fingers back and going back to a more paw-like structure. So they would be much faster on all fours.
And in order for them to be seen all over the country, what kind of breeding population would we need, do you think?
It would be hard to estimate, but considering how many acres of unexplored land there are in the North America alone, I mean, look at the Canadian wilderness, the vastness of unexplored areas. You get out to the Western Territories out near Alaska, there are hundreds of miles where there's literally no settlements or even roads. Here in the United States, if you look at a satellite map of the U.S. and you follow major river systems, even despite the fact that we have huge cities like Chicago and St. Louis and New York and L.A., there are still massive sections of unbroken wilderness, and some of that runs right through the Ozarks, right along the rivers through the Mark Twain National Forest, and that I think that explains why we get so many sightings, because you find them not only in the wilderness areas but generally along major riverways.
Okay, so they're the apex predator. Have there ever been a documented case of a Dogman encounter with a Bigfoot?
The Choctaw Indians referred to the two as having territorial wars. There are a number of native tribes that talk about Bigfoot and Dogman being very aggressive toward each other and even attacking each other on sight. In the Land Between the Lakes area, if you look at the north end of LBL, you will see that's where the Dogman encounters are clustered. But you get Bigfoot accounts in the south end of LBL, and this is not a small park; it is huge. And in the middle, they have herds of elk and buffalo. So I think they have very clearly delineated their territory, and both prey on those elk and buffalo.
I'm just trying to imagine I have my bedroom window opens out into our backyard, and in the summer we have the windows wide open, and the sound of two raccoons squaring off. I mean, It is otherworldly for people who've heard it know what I mean. I mean, it is frightening to hear raccoons snarling and growling, and I can't imagine what it would sound like for a Bigfoot and a Dogman to square off. That must just be absolutely hellish.
It would sound like somebody with a semi truck crashing through the woods. I would estimate probably. You'd hear trees smashing, snarls and growls. In fact, they say that Bigfoot is capable of infrasound, so I would say you would feel the sound as much as hear it.
What about the intelligence of these creatures?
I think they're very intelligent, like cunning intelligent, but I don't think they're human level intelligent.
Some people in accounts I've read say that there seems to be some sort of a what's the word I'm looking for? Not telekinesis, or is it telekinesis? Telepathic communication. Thank you. Telepathic communication with these creatures. What have you heard about that?
There are a number of people that report having what they call mind speak with Bigfoot. I'm not gonna call anybody out and say they're wrong. I'm not gonna argue with it because I make no claims of being an expert in cryptozoology, and anybody that claims they're an expert is selling you something, because there are no experts in this field. They're just people that have researched it and developed their own theories over time. But since we don't have a body to study, these theories are just that. They're theories. So there are really no experts in this field. But my opinion is that what people are thinking is mind speak, because a lot of people who say they had mind speak, they had this overwhelming feeling like get out, like hearing the voice get out. But I've experienced that feeling in dangerous areas, but it's not something talking to me. It's that survival instinct in the back of your head that's paying attention, that notices there are no animal sounds anymore in your area, and you feel like you're being stalked, and your primitive brain is telling you to get out. I personally think that's what it is. I don't know that people are having lengthy Bigfoot conversations through MindSpeak. I could be wrong. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's impossible, but it just hasn't happened to me. I haven't experienced it.
All right, we'll take a quick time out, come back with D.A. Roberts, cryptozoologist and author of horror, dystopian, cryptid horror, science fiction genres. And we're talking about the apex predator, folks. Goes by different names: werewolves, dogmen. Back with more of our conversation. We'll also open up the phone lines and take questions from the live chats as well. Stick with us. Don't go away.
Of the universe. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett on Zoomer Radio. To speak with Richard live, call 416-360-0740 or toll free at 1-866-740-4740.
Yet another reason not to go out into the woods alone at night. We're talking Dogmen. D.A. Roberts, the Apex Predator series of books. It's now numbering 4. We've got Wolf Moon, Blood Moon, Hunter's Moon. The 4th is Horned Moon, and another one on the way. I'm up here in Ontario, southwestern Ontario, around the Great Lakes, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario. Any dogmen sighting up here, do you know of?
There are dogman sightings all over that area. I mean, with the Michigan dogman and the Beast of Bray Road so close, there are Canadian sightings of dogman as well. Just about anywhere you've got a Bigfoot sighting, you also can find dogman sightings in those areas because they seem to share the same prey items, the same habitats.
So if they can't find a human, they'll settle for a small dog, a large dog, maybe some livestock, I'm guessing.
Well, wolves are omnivorous. They will eat just about anything they can kill, and I would say that same attribute would go over to a dogman as well. I mean, if they've got an opportunity to kill and eat a deer, they'll take the opportunity, but they're probably just as likely to go after a stray hiker.
Do they work in packs the way the regular wolves do?
Some say yes, some say no. There's been a lot of individual sightings of dogmen. They've been seen alone, but there are just as many that people have seen them in groups or started out only seeing one and then realized they were being surrounded before they got out of the area. So I think they do hunt in packs personally.
Oh, boy. That's not good. One is enough. Now they hunt in packs. Oh, great. So what about you, in your work in law enforcement? Have you ever run across any, I don't know, a potential dogman encounter, or been asked to investigate a possible dogman encounter?
Well, I've been privy to animal mutilations and missing pets that just disappeared without explanation, but those could have been easily attributed to existing wildlife like bobcats, and we have mountain lions in Missouri and black bears as well. In times when the weather's getting bad and food's a little lean, the bigger predators will come closer to civilization and start taking out pets because they're easy prey items. But I kept my cryptozoology research very separate from my law enforcement career, because if defense attorneys get wind of you being an amateur cryptozoologist, they will use that against you on the stand because they will try to destroy your credibility.
But one day, perhaps, DA, you like Gray Eagle, those two worlds could collide. Very
much so. But I'm retired now, so I can talk freely. But I have a lot of friends that are still in law enforcement that have had experiences that have told me the experiences, but said never attach my name to this because it'll ruin my credibility on the defensive stand.
All right. Well, without involving names, can you share one of those stories of a law enforcement officer and a dogman?
Absolutely. There's an area about 40 miles southwest of here an old abandoned campground called the Joe Bald Recreation Area. I've had some odd experiences down there myself, but this happened to a deputy that worked for the Stone County Sheriff's Department. It's an abandoned campground. The Army Corps of Engineers shut it down around 1999 or 2000 after there have been a number of disappearances involved with the park. It's basically been reclaimed by nature. There's still like badly in need of repair roads that go back to this campsite area, but it's closed off. You've basically got to go in there at your own risk. It's completely overgrown. You can still find the concrete like picnic tables and camping areas in the woods, but they've been overgrown. And that was a place that a lot of the deputies would go down and park their vehicles away from the beaten path so they could do reports without being disturbed and things like that. Well, this particular deputy was sitting down there one night filling out a report, and he said he kept having the feeling that he was being watched. And just out of the blue, something came up behind his vehicle and slammed its hands down. And he said it was definitely hands on the deck of his trunk and almost bottomed the truck, the Charger out. He hit his brakes because he was in park, and the red light lit up something very broad and hairy, and he could see its hands were still on the trunk deck. And he just threw it in gear and punched it because it wasn't a person. Obviously, it was some sort of creature, and he believed it was a Bigfoot creature. He rocketed out of the area and drove back into town, pulled into a convenience store, got out, and the deck of his trunk had been caved in.
Wow. Let's see here. Well, we're almost getting ready to head into a break, so why don't we do that? We'll come back, and I've got a bunch of questions lined up from the YouTube live chat, and we'll also open up the phone lines at 416-360-0740 in the Greater Toronto area, 416-360-0740, and toll free from just about anywhere, 866-740-4740, 866-740-4740. Back with more after these.
This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. To reach Richard, call 416-360-0740 or toll free at 1-866-740-4740.
All right, DA, let's dive into the YouTube live chat questions. And let's see, we've got Solar Warden asking, what are your thoughts on the legendary Montauk monster? Was it a genuine cryptid or some kind of messed up lab experiment? Also, any thoughts on the Sierra sounds?
Well, I think the Montauk monster was probably an experiment due to the close proximity to the Plum Island Research Facility. I think it was an experiment that somehow escaped, and it would also explain why the body just vanished after a few days. So I would very much think that the Montauk monster was probably a government experiment, something that they were performing experiments on or something. I have actually on my podcast, I was able to interview Ron Moorhead. We talked at length about the Sierra sounds. The recordings he made were analyzed by the Navy, and they put it through a cryptolinguistics computer to try to determine if it was a language. And not only was it determined to be a language that they couldn't break the code on, it exhibited characteristics both above and below the human vocal spectrum. So there's no way a human could have made it, and it was definitely a language. So I think Ron Moorhead legitimately captured Bigfoot speaking.
As I interviewed him a couple of years ago, if memory serves, he described the language as sounding almost like what did he say, samurai or something like that?
Yeah, they referred to it as samurai chatter.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Show Me the Truth 74 asks, a bit of a long shot, but do you have any stories from Pomme de Terre State Park in Missouri? I've camped there many times and saw possible UFOs.
I have camped in Pomme de Terre many times myself. There are a number of Bigfoot accounts in that area, including one where a fisherman that was near the dam spotted two of them at the edge of the water like they were trying to catch fish.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Our good friend YY asks, what can you tell us, DA, about Wendigo and skinwalkers?
Well, skinwalkers are primarily a Navajo legend, although similar legends exist in other tribes as well. But the skinwalkers are shaman who went to pure dark side. They committed an act so vile that it basically cursed them. While being similar to the werewolf legend, they are not limited to a wolf form. They are supposedly able to change into anything. So the skinwalkers are very different than a dogman legend. It's simply for the fact that they can take on any form. The Wendigo, however, is very specific. All of the legends around the Wendigo, and there's about a dozen different spellings and pronunciations of the Wendigo, the Wendigo, the Wendiga. The list goes on and on with the Wendigo, but they're all very similar in the stories. That during lean times, in the dead of winter, when starvation was close at hand, if somebody broke the taboo of eating human flesh, they would be cursed to become this ravenous beast that was always hungry for human flesh. There are documented cases of it in Canada, up along the Trans-Canadian Highway back. I want to say it was in 2008 or 2007. There was a case that they have identified. They called it Wendigo psychosis, where a guy, for unknown reasons, just decided to attack and eat another passenger on a bus, on a Greyhound bus traveling down the highway.
Oh, right. Yes, he cut his head off.
Correct.
Yeah.
They actually referred to that as Wendigo psychosis. But in a lot of especially the Algonquin legends, not only can you become a Wendigo by eating human flesh, but you can also be possessed by the spirit of the Wendigo. So they refer to it as Wendigo psychosis now, but it could have simply been the spirit of the Wendigo possessed him.
You have another series you have a number of series of books. One is Codename Wild Hunt, and you've got Curse of the Wendigo.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about that whole series of books and that particular volume.
When I first started really digging deep into cryptid lore, I kept hearing a persistent rumor that there was a group of military special forces that hunted dangerous cryptids. I kept hearing this rumor from different locations. So my Codename Wild Hunt series is about that unit. I created a specific unit that's what they do. They hunt down dangerous cryptids, especially when they start killing people. And they're doing so in a way they want to keep it from the public eye. So that's what that book series is about. It's about the special forces unit that hunts them down. In that specific case of the Curse of the Wendigo, they encounter a Wendigo that has been attacking people in the Minnesota woods, and when they engage the creature, they have to find out the hard way, unfortunately, which parts of the Wendigo lore are real and which parts are made up. There are a number of ways that vary with tribes on how they're supposedly killed. One way, you have to cut its heart out with a silver knife and then burn the body and the heart separately. There are other ways where you remove the head, other ways that refer to using fire. So what this team encounters, they have to keep running through different versions of the lore until they find what actually works.
Wow, that's got Amazon Prime or Netflix series written all over it. Has Hollywood come calling, DA?
I would love it if they did. I would love to see any of these series made into books. I have the Lakeview Man series, which is about a small sheriff's department here in Missouri that is dealing with cryptid occurrences that keep arriving in their area. I have of course, Apex Predator series, the Codename Wild Hunt series, a new series that has one book out called The Nightmare Hunter, which is it's very much, think Carl Kolchak.
One of my favorites. Yes.
It's an investigative reporter that's digging into these cryptid reports, and through basically dumb luck, very much in the Carl Kolchak fashion, discovers they're real and winds up neck deep in it. I've also got a fantasy series in the works. The first book is not out yet. I have a sci-fi series called The Lost Legion. There are 2 books of that out. And I have a zombie series called The Ragnarok Rising Saga. It's a 10-book series where I blend elements of the zombie apocalypse with Norse mythology.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Sigma 6 asks, DA, what are your thoughts on Skinwalker Ranch? Any idea what's going on there?
There is so much going on with the Skinwalker Ranch. I don't know that I could really nail it down to any one thing. They've seen UFOs there. They've seen Skinwalker type creatures there. They've seen portals open. I think that area is a nexus point. Maybe the dimensional barriers are thinner there. I don't know. I do know that that land was cursed. Years and years ago, the Ute tribe began enslaving the Navajo. And when the Navajo fled that area, they cursed it. And that land has been cursed, and everybody that's lived on it has either fled or sold the land in a very, very short order. That land has changed hands a lot over the last 100 years, but it was allegedly cursed by Navajo shaman who were getting vengeance against the Uinta Ute for enslaving their people.
We were just talking about the Night Stalker and Carl Kolchak, one of the great characters of all time, and I just noticed on the Skype call you're wearing a straw fedora. Is that an homage to Mr. Kolchak?
Yes, sir. It's actually a reproduction. It's called the Night Stalker.
Oh wow! I got to get me one of those.
If you look online, you look up reproduction of the Carl Kolchak or Kolchak hat, or I can find the link and send it to you. But it's an authentic reproduction of Carl's hat.
Do you have the seersucker suit as well?
No, my wife would probably kill me if I showed up in a seersucker suit.
Nobody could wear a seersucker suit and sneakers the way that
flash cube cameras.
Yeah, and Darren McGavin could. Yes, indeed. So, what's next? I mean, my gosh, are you writing? I mean, how do you write? Do you write long form? Do you bang it out on a manual typewriter? That's the way I picture you, is hammering away on a manual typewriter.
I would love to do that, to write on a manual typewriter, because I just love the feel of it. But transferring that into Word documents is extremely difficult. So I do my writing on the computer. I used to actually write it out by hand. And then my wife would transcribe it onto the computer for me. But in an incident that I won't go into, I'm left-handed. I sliced open my left hand between the thumb and the palm, and it was like 48 stitches to put it back together. And as a result, if I write with my I'm left-handed again. If I write for any length of time, my hand cramps so bad I can't write very long. So now I just got into the habit of typing it all on the computer, and now that's pretty much how it goes. But I do want to get one of those old manual typewriters for the shelf in my writing room.
Well, now they have the computer keyboards that sound and feel like a manual typewriter.
Yeah, I told my wife I wanted one of those for Christmas. I hope I get it.
There you go. All right. Well, what a delight, DA. I can't believe I've been in this business 20 years, and this is the first time we've crossed paths. So it's going to be the first of many, I hope.
I hope so, yes.
You're just absolutely captivating, and now you gave me yet another reason to check under my bed before I hop into the old Schlafensack. Have you ever scared yourself with your writing?
I've written scenes that were emotionally draining, and I've also written scenes that have kind of given me the willies. Like I was writing one scene in one of the Lakeview Man books. I was actually the first Lakeview Man book. And my wife tapped on the door and she's like, honey, it's 3:00 in the morning and the dog wants out. I don't want to go out in the yard by myself. Do you want to take him? And I said, yeah, sure. So I grabbed my jacket and it was chilly out and I took the dog into the backyard. And I just had this weird heebie-jeebie feeling the whole time because I'd just been writing this really creepy scene. I'm like, okay, the dog's going to go out during the daylight from here on out.
All right. Well, a great pleasure, D.A. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
D.A. Roberts. Look for all of his books at Amazon. The Apex Predator. All right. My thanks to Ryan and to Carlos. I'll be back next week. Gary Wayne, the author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, will be here for the full 2 hours. In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed, and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light. What I say in a whisper, proclaim from the housetops. Move over, Aphrodite. I'm coming home. Good night.